Hey everybody, this is Al from El Rey Collection, and I'm really excited about this very short series, which is the Pre-War Seven Wonders series. Lots of different sports do this. There's different iterations of this. Trying to find the elite, the best, the most classic cards across any sport. Of course, the sport that I'll choose to do it here is soccer cards and stickers, and I'll get into a couple of the rules that I have in a minute. I'm gonna segment this into three different videos. One is the pre-war videos. The other one's vintage, so kind of post-war up until probably 1980, 79, 80-ish, and then the modern, which would include what we traditionally call pre-modern as well as modern. So this is kind of this is the first one. That's why I have kind of the oldest ancient wonder here, the pyramids in Egypt. And without further ado, I'll get right down to it. So first, if you could please read this disclaimer, pause and read this in detail. Of course, I'm a registered investment advisor with the SEC, and this is really not meant to be investment advice. I'm absolutely not making any comments about the future results you could have if you bought any one of these cards. There will, there's a huge these are hugely risky assets if you decide to invest in soccer cards and stickers. So please don't use money that you don't have. For me, this is a hobby and not really meant to be an investment, but I know some people look at sports cards as an investment. So anytime I would use a word like will, expect, anticipate, target, any of these types of things, it's really certainly not investment advice, and they're just my general opinion. So without that, if you want to pause this and read this, please do. I would appreciate it. Just understand that I'm not intending to give investment advice in this video or any video for that matter. Um, Particularly, this project's meant to be fun. I'd love to hear your thoughts. There are no right or wrong answers, so please leave comments. This will be one of the videos that'll be most interested to see people's comments. It's my video, so I get to make my rules, and my rules are the following. Number one, there's only one card or sticker per player. So even if Pele, is the best player, he won't have all cards for him. It's kind of like a Mount Rushmore situation. I'm going to pick one. Players, generally need to be regarded among the highest level of importance for their particular country, for the world. I think just having the ultimately rare, one of one sticker for some bizarre country is interesting, and some people collect that way, but it doesn't kind of make my list, so to speak, if it's just rarities for rarity's sake. I'm also going to focus on just the cards in my collection because I actually have most of them, but I will comment on a couple others that if I would have had them, I probably would have swapped them out with another card. And this became clear to me as I was doing this that there are what tends to happen is most of the best players of the generation appear, and most of their best cards appear, and then of course I don't have all of those. So really there's no other real rules. I try to keep it as simple as possible. In general, there's going to be a favorability for rarer cards, whether those are graded or ungraded. You'll see some don't have any graded. So there's no availability thresholds and no overt value considerations. So in general, obviously more valuable cards are valuable because there's more demand and interest. So it just innately is going to favor more valuable to less valuable cards, but that's really not the intention. These are things, assuming that I could only pick, 7 pre-war cards to have in my collection. These are the 7 that they would be. And if you said, hey, you were going to get these and you could never sell them, then these are the ones that I would pick. And that would potentially leave behind cards that may be quote unquote more valuable. So this is clearly a different approach from PSA's list that was done back in 2022 by our really friend and esteemed collector, Matt Hendler at PSA. I'll show that link there. And their approach was really to have a more you know, cards that represented the hobby as a whole that you could actually go out and collect, and didn't really include the scarcest, most valuable, or desirable cards from my perspective, but there were some of the more iconic cards of players. So with that, I think I think the reality is this is not typically for most collectors going to be a list of cards they can just go out and get tomorrow. I mean, this would take a lot of work, and I think that most collections won't end up with most of these cards. Maybe there's one or two here and there that you can pick up, but I just feel like it's a pretty daunting task to try to replicate these seven wonders. Not impossible, but would take a lot of patience and probably capital as well. So without further ado, let's remind ourselves the PSA list from February of 22. There's the link if you want to read a great article, again, written by Matt Hendler. It has some absolutely classic cards in it, and their list basically covered what I'm going to separate into two eras. So what you notice here is their list of the vintage seven wonders is what I think they called it. Basically all includes post-war cards, and I just think I can understand it. There's not a lot of graded pre-war soccer cards, but it just that is unfortunate for me, so I'm going to fill that hole with it. By the way, these are all amazingly great choices. Front and center is obviously one of my all-time favorite cards, the Cruyff Palarex. You've got it flanked by probably two of the other top five in terms of, or at least top 10. No matter how you look at it, I don't think you can have these guys outside of the top 10, where you have a Beckenbauer classic Bergman, and you have a Maradona 77 football disc, and then flanked on those sides, you've got the best rookie, which is amazing, and my favorite Dracula, Bobby Charlton, and then flanked by that, you've got the Eusebio Panini Calciatore first Panini sticker, as well as the Alifa Bologue at for Pele. So again, awesome cards. These seven in and of themselves would be a classic soccer card collection, but I'm gonna say, hey, look at these are all for me vintage cards, and there's no pre-war. So let's get into the pre-war and let's see what we have. So now the big question: what are my cards? So we'll go one by one. I'm not going to prioritize and say this is the best one, this is not. I'm just going to go in chronological order. I don't see people saying, hey, on Mount Rushmore, is it Roosevelt, I guess, is on the left, or Lincoln, or Washington? I don't know. He's the best one. No, these are the seven. If you made the seven, amazing. If you didn't make the cut, well, you'll get an honorable mention at the end. Okay, so moving on. The first one, it's not a number. The first one is probably not a surprise to many, and especially given the date that I'm doing this video in February 2024. This is the 1980s Bane Shield, Arthur Wharton. We just had one of the largest sales at Lawden's in January. The card sold for more or less $42,000. I think somewhere between $42,000 and $43,000 US dollars. It was, there are 5 different Bane Shields of Arthur Wharton known. Why is Arthur Wharton known? Why is he important? Well, he's not necessarily the highest top flight. So here's where this is probably one of the few exceptions to my top flight player rule, where they had to be at the top of the game. He was a great player. He was goalie. He was a phenomenal athlete. He was the 100-yard champion. He is credited, although there are different accounts, of being the first player of African descent in top flight football. Now, again, there are people that disagree with this, but in general, he's in the way that, hey, we have Jackie Robinson. He broke the color barrier, yes, but there were plenty of other players playing in professional leagues, although it wasn't Major League Baseball, all throughout the world, in many countries in Latin America and Japan, for example. So, but he is important in English football. He's a member of the English Hall of Fame, and it's really important for UK football to have kind of a someone to talk about this narrative. And of course, being a player of African descent in the UK was, it was probably harder for people like John Barnes in the 70s potentially than in the 1880s. We don't know. None of us were there, but he still is symbolically something important for the sport. And the fact that he appears on some of the very first soccer cards, that makes it even more interesting. So there's 5 different Baines shields that are known. Actually, one is a copy. The one that actually sold was a copy. These are all one of ones. The one that I have is this fan copy, and the other ones are shields, 2 colors, 2 monochrome, and there are some different dates associated with them, but they're all generally the late 1880s. Even just the first baseball cards, just by themselves with no notable players, are significantly sought after just because there were some of the first. So here we have the first African descent player that is in the English Hall of Fame. We have extreme rarity of one of ones, and we have and we have just the general beauty of the Bain shields, which are highly coveted by themselves. So you put all those factors together, and this is how this Wharton shield, which was on my want list for more than a decade before I finally got it. This is why the Arthur Wharton makes it into my list, despite him not being a superstar. So you had to check a lot of other boxes to get someone of Wharton's footballing stature and accomplishments to make this list, and I think he just makes that number one, because the rarity, the highly coveted nature of the shields, the rarity of the shields, and the importance. He is in the English Football Hall of Fame, denoting the importance of him as a figure, even if not the player with the most things, and then coupling that with one of the first soccer / football cards. It is amazing. So you can see this is the actual screenshot from the sale. It sold for 26,000 British pounds, and again, this is the Briggs football shield, which is actually a knockoff of the Baines shields, and it went for, so in some respects you could say it's potentially the least desirable of the Baines shields. Again, I think they're all desirable, but this to me was a pretty epic sale, and it went for more than 42,000. Okay, moving on to the second member of the pre-war 7 wonders is the 1905 Singleton and Cole Steve Bloomer. It's an iconic pre-war set. He's actually, if you look at this picture, you zoom in, it's hard for me to do here on the screen, but you'll see he's actually wearing a cap from an 1895 appearance on him. He's in the 3 Lions kit, so that to me is super cool. It's one of the most classic designs in all of soccer. It's pretty tough to get these cards. There's 3 different bloomers, and the bloomer, this particular one, has a pop of 3. There's got to be a mind-blowing PSA 6 out there. Never seen that. That's got to be one of the best pre-war cards when you're just looking at individual slabs in the entire hobby. There's a 3 out there, and then what I have here is a 1. But it certainly is that iconic set. It's hard just to pick the Singleton and Cole. There's so many that are so close here, whether that's the 1907 Taddy, the 3 Nuns, Cope's Clips, Cadles, the John Sinclair. I mean, so many amazing Bloomer cards. And Bloomer, to me, is really the best player of the late 1980s through 1910s. I know lots of people are a huge fan of Meredith, especially tend to be United and City collectors. And he was amazing, and his longevity was amazing. But in pure skill, I really believe, based on everything I've read, of course, I never saw any of these guys play, that Bloomer was the best player of the late 1890s through the first decade of the year. So the Singleton and Cole edges out some other contenders, and it's one of the best cards of him that I think is out there. Of course, he does have a Bane shield. I'll preemptively let you know I won't try to include multiples of the same types of issues either. That's one thing I didn't mention in the rules, but in general, that's one thing that I'll do. So he's got a number of different Bane shields, and he has obviously a number of different cards. This one, out of the ones that I have, I would have picked. That said, I probably, if I did have the St. Pete's, which you'll see here on the left-hand side, this one, if I did have that, I would probably have had that one in my list. This St. Pete's, pretty rare, very rare card. I think I've probably seen or know of 3 or 4. Also a PSA, it's a PSA 0 as far as I know. It went for north of $40,000 last year, I believe that was. So super amazing, very cool card. Not in my collection, hence I went with the Singleton and Cole. Here are some of the other ones that I mentioned before. Here's a 3 Nuns, JF and Bell. This is a 3 Nuns, and here's another 3 Nuns, and these are going for $3,000. And then you had some Taddies also going for $4,000. So these are more like second tier, but still amazing cards from my perspective. And this 6, you may say, is probably the deal of the century. If you actually looked at the card, it looked like it had some surface damage. So that's probably what kept that down. Anyway, some pretty amazing bloomer cards. And for me, it ends up being the Singleton and Cole that runs the day of bloomer. The third one should probably come as no surprise to some that know the El Rey collection. This is the 1914 Taddy London Mixture Meredith Taddy. So he also has many cards that go back to the early 1900s, but this particular set has an incredible lore around it. This is kind of like the Honest Wagner lore, but like exponentially. This card itself wasn't even cataloged to the early 2000s. It was hypothesized to believe, but there's such a dearth of the 1914 London Mixture Taddies, and particularly from the Manchester United squad, that it was hypothesized to exist, but never really found. And the card, why? Because it was really issued at the beginning of the war, and they discontinued in support of the war issue, and maybe the Manchester United were just on the last sheets or something. Only 2 copies have been graded at PSA, and I'm not even sure I can believe that this is the case, because they actually previously mistook mine. This one right here, you'll see it says on the top 1913, 1914 Taddy in PSA 6. You can notice up here there's no PSA 6 left in the pop report. And that's because this was my card, and I had this. It was mislabeled as a 1314, and it's actually a 1907. I sent it back into PSA. They labeled it correctly, took it out of the 1914 pop report, and therefore moved it back into the 1907. There's still 2 sitting in the pop report here, but the crazy thing about this card is it is just unbelievably scarce. I mean, even the 1907 Taddy has 6 copies of Meredith, and the 1914 is like exponentially rarer. So this card definitely draws comparisons to the Honest Wagner, like why on a relative basis it's so much more rare than the other T206s. It's the same situation here with an unbelievably important, probably the second most important player of early football that covers whatever 40 plus years, and he's probably the second most important player and during that period in a Manchester United card in a Taddy with such an iconic setup with the super rare back and with all the lore. So crazy amazing card. Super happy to have this in the El Rey collection, and clearly one of my 7 wonders of the pre-war world. Moving on, going back a little bit here, I just wanted to show you the London mixture back. You won't get that. You won't get this type of a back. Actually, the size is slightly different from the 1907 Tatties as well. And the 1907 Tatties, as you see here, have done pretty well at auction, with a 2 pulling, more than $5,000 in the most recent auction. And a little bit before that, there was close to a $4,000 and a 5. So the much more common brother performs very well for pre-war soccer, but in the end, the London mixture back is just next level. And by the way, the back is amazing. Look at the detail on that, as opposed to the 1907 grapple mixture one. So I'm in grapple. It's grapple, and what's the other one? I can't remember right now. But anyway, the 1914 is the one that makes the list, not the 1907. So now on to the fourth one. We're moving from the 1910s to the 1920s, and this is probably the easiest card to get on my list, and it's by far not that easy. There is 26 different copies graded by PSA. Obviously, Dixie Dean was one of the greatest pre-war strikers in the Premier League. He still has the record with 60 goals in a season. We call him here, or his name here that we refer to him, is the Babe Ruth of soccer, because he has 60 goals, like Ruth had 60 home runs. Obviously there was a lot of talk about him in the last, not this current season with Holland hurt, but the previous season where Holland was on pace to try to get him. He still had more than 400 goals for club and country, and slightly less than a goal a game. This card is also amazing. It has it's photographic, which makes it really hard to get in high grade. It typically has a little bit of curling to the card, or some surface cracks as the photograph can kind of crack. When I got into the hobby, people told me this was a common card. I've looked at it. I've tried to buy these cards whenever I could find them throughout the years, and I just truly believe at this point it's not as common as some people believe. Sure, there are more of these in UK collections, but they're also really, really hard to grade because of the paper and the cracking that we see on it. In fact, there's only 2 non-qualified copies higher than a PSA 3.5. So you've got a PSA 4 and a PSA 5, and then you've got a qualified PSA 4, likely a miscut. I know that PSA 2 qualify is a miscut because I once owned that card. And there's a PSA 3.5 and 6 threes. So still very tough. Pop 26. Imagine if you were talking about a baseball or American football player where their rookie card only had 25 available copies. I mean, this is a monster in soccer card collecting. And, I feel myself fortunate to own a couple of these and have owned a couple of them. And I think most collectors that own this should feel the same way. Absolutely iconic, super important card. You'll see here that that we had just a couple months ago, just a couple weeks ago, or not even, I guess, a week ago, a PSA 1.5 sold for $3,700. A PSA 2 MC, that was the one that I owned, sold for almost $6,000. And previous to the boom, I actually sold, you'll see auction seller on eBay. When the boom was kind of happening in spring of 2020, my store got cleaned out, and anything that I had kind of on my store got bought, and that was a PSA 3 for $2,000, which I obviously wish never happened, but it happened. So anyway, these still pull great numbers. I think there's real value here in the long term if we believe that vintage soccer will do well, just because of the rarity, iconicness of the issue, photographic paper. Really, really hard to fake this. So these are really pretty special cards. There's no official PSA APR for this, and there's only been more or less 1 to 1.5 sales a year. So that gives you an idea of the scarcity. Anyway, so let's move on to the next card that is part of the 7 wonders of the pre-war soccer collecting. And it is, I just realized I just spelled Giuseppe's name wrong here. Oops. Well, I get you can get your money back if you paid to watch this video. So Mesa, not Biasipe. He is he's probably the best Italian player of all time. I know that Baggio would probably disagree with that. I know we've got some amazing uh, defenders that that have gone through Italy through the time. There's so many great players that have played for Italy, but Mesa, I just think he won 2 World Cups. He was captain. He was dominant. I think he's easily among the top 5 pre-war players to almost every source that I've ever read. For me, I think he's the best. I have him ranked as the best pre-war soccer player. He scored 300 goals for club and country. And this to me is not only one of the rarest, but one of the most beautiful cards. You kind of need to see it like horizontally, but it fit best on the slide to do it like all the other slides. But it's just it's Art Deco. The back on this card is absolutely amazing with all sorts of little, details about an offer. Getting any Stagni Pettazzoni card is really, really hard. So I just think being so much rarer, iconic, Art Deco-y, this to me is multiple steps beyond what the Lorati is. And PSA labels this, I think, as 1928, if I believe that right. SGC labeled it as 27 to 29. Regardless, it's in the rookie constellation. And so because of that, I just think it's rarer and cooler than the Lorati. By the way, I have a Lorati, so I'm not talking that card down. I love that card. It's just a matter of love. I love, or I love. And this one I love. So this to me is Mesa St. Pete's card. It's just it out of all the cards that I have, in the pre-war section, this may be the last one to go. So again, I'm not ranking them. This is the only one graded by PSA. And obviously it has the Al Dragella collection pedigree on the slab as well, which is super cool. And this will not be leaving my collection while I am above ground. So moving on to I just want to also show you, just for those of you who don't follow the soccer card industry that closely, you'll see that the Mesa Lorati that I was just mentioning has done quite well. A couple years ago, it really kind of ballooned at close to $70,000. But even in these relatively low grades recently, in kind of the down market of 2023, it was still close to $20,000. The one example here was that did a little less than that was the PSA 1 version, and it wasn't. It just looked a little rougher. So again, there's only a few of any Stagni cards that have ever surfaced in the past decade. No stars have sold to my knowledge, and the Lorati is still holding strong as probably the most expensive, routinely sold pre-war soccer card. So there's only 4 graded at PSA, and I mentioned that that SGC grades the Stagnis as 27 to 28. So next one is probably the second most gettable card from pre-war, and this is the 1928 to 32. I think we think it's more like a 1930. Greeling, Matthias Sindellar. Of course, he captained the Wonder team at the 34 World Cup. And they would likely have been the favorites in the 1938 World Cup over Italy if it weren't for the annexation of Austria by Germany, and that created a whole other lore to Sindellar's career, because in the last farewell match, he defied the Nazis and drove Austria to win, and then he had a mysterious death thereafter. Which obviously added to the lore. There have been books and movies written about this, but back to the football, he was absolutely the best Austrian football of the 20th century, according to IFFHS. And I have him as a top 5 pre-war player. That's again my grade, but many others have them in that range. I don't think I've ever seen him considered to not be a top 10 pre-war player. So he was the Mozart of football. And also had the nickname of the Paper Man. There's only the thing about this card is there's also only, which is typical with the many German issues, there's only 2 copies above a PSA 2. There's 10 copies in total. So there 4 of them are ones. A lot of them have really destroyed backs because they were pasted into albums, and so they're ripped out, and they either have paper added because they were ripped out and pulled part of the album with them or notebook, or they have a paper loss. So when they were pulled off, some of the cards stayed in the album. So of course there's not a lot of APR estimates in this, but most sales have that we've seen have been relatively low grade, and they still go for thousands of dollars, even in kind of the worst shape. So that's the Sindellar. I'll show you the sales that I was able to drum up here. There's a 3300, which was from Golden, I think. Is that right? Yeah. And then there's a 2600, and that's a 1.5. That actually had a decent smudged back. And then there's a 1 that I think had a pretty, you can see this one's off center. It did 2,600 euros, so more or less 3,000 US. So that's kind of the entry point, I think, on these. And those were in kind of the drab market of 2023. One was listed on eBay. This is not a sale, but I wouldn't be surprised to see nicer, good eye appeal copies go in kind of that range up there. They were asking 7,000, maybe it'd be a little bit lower. There's no APR for this card, but the lower grade ones still go for what I believe is reasonable valuations, given the fact there's only 10 of these graded. Sure, there's more out there in Germany, but in general, I would say this is absolutely one of the top 7 pre-war cards in my mind. Moving on, this one's really hard for me, and this because there's so many great Argentine players and so many amazing cards from Argentina and Brazil, and I had to just go with this 1936 what I call Leyes. Here it's the actual editor is Nobleza de Tabacos, but the Leyes de Football, because on the reverse of these cards they talk about the rules of football, the laws of football. And Jose Manuel Moreno was known as El Charro. He won championships in 4 countries, so he's just such an innate leader. Whether he went to Mexico or Chile, he gathered the team around him and drove them to success. So he was absolutely one of the best players of generation. If you think about this, the IFFHS put him as the 5th best South American footballer of the 20th century, behind only Pele, Maradona, Di Stefano, and Garrincha. So he was absolutely epic player. And he was just insane. And his Lace, which is his earliest graded card, there's some rumors that there could be some earlier stuff from Argentina. I've never held anything earlier from Moreno, but regardless of those, this set, or if those actually exist, this set is just classic. It's a beautiful Taddy-esque photographic type card. It has a beautiful back. There's 2 different versions, the white version and the green version. I call them the regular and the Christmas version, because the green version actually has red text on the back, so hence green and red Christmas version, and the regular version doesn't. The regular version is typically more available than the green version, not like a 1 in 10 type situation, but more like a 1 in 3. And you can see it here playing out in the PSA numbers, where there's 9 white versions or regular versions, and there are 4 green versions. oddly enough, the green versions have come at a much higher grade. The green versions are in 2, 4, and 5, and the white versions, the highest is at 2.5. So I don't know exactly what's going on there. Obviously, I have the 2 here, but I just think this is just an epic card. So hard to choose from so many amazing Argentine and Brazilian early stickers, pre-war stickers. But this one gets the nod for me, and I think kind of sits in the group as the third most gettable card on this list. Maybe it's second, maybe it's slightly easier than the Sindellar. I just think there's a lot more Sindellar Greelings in Germany and Europe that are still kind of undiscovered than there are JM Moreno cards in Argentina. Again, from a pop perspective, it would be, what's that, 10? This one looks more common, but I actually do think this one, in the end of the day, fast forward 3, 4, 5 years, we'll see more Greeling Sindellars than we will see JM Morenos. All right. So easily top 10 player, probably top 5 in my mind. I mean, top 5 all-time South American behind those guys, which are probably arguably 3 of the top 10 and certainly 4 of the top 20. It just goes to show you how important of a player he was in many, many different geographies. When we look back at how this card's done at auction in 2022, there was a $6,300 sale. There was a book that had all of them, including the Jose Manuel Moreno rookie card in the pasted in it. So when you extracted it, you're probably going to damage it and get a 1. And then a PSA 2 went for a very reasonable $3,600 in July of 2023. It's obviously a key player, key card, doesn't sell a lot, and the pop is only 13 between both versions. Moving on, I guess this is kind of where I kind of wrap it up and let you know, hey, these are my pre-war 7 wonders. When I look at this, and I changed out a number of these cards from time to time, I think I got the tremendous amount of balance that I wanted. I wanted to have something from, pre-1900, needed to have at least something from the first decade of the game. Wanted to, highlight, of course, the extreme rarity of the 1913/14 Tatties. We need to go to some of the best players of the generation. And by getting Dean, Mesa, Sindellar, and J.F. Moreno, I felt really good about that. Rarity, drives the day here, but also all of these cards, to my eyes, have amazing eye appeal. So, when I sit back and look at this pre-war 7 wonders, I feel really good about these cards. I hope you feel good about these cards too. But I also wanted to take a pause for a moment and talk about what are my honorable mentions. I mean, some of the other cards, because there were so many that went in and out, and I changed. And ultimately, here are only some of them. Some of them I mentioned in the course of this. In the pre 1900 range, it was really hard not to include the Circus Girl, Cohen and Wien, Geo Smith, one of the great original players of the game. Such a gentleman, also played cricket, and the Circus Girls are just super tough. I also thought about the Sinclair. I talked a lot about the Bloomer cards over there, but the Sinclair is just so nice. Regional issue, great card. I think the fact that he's in a suit as opposed to a uniform, and just the great imagery of the Singleton and Cole with the 1895 cap tipped it in that direction for me. The Lorati Mesa is obviously a classic card. Probably one of the Argentine cards that didn't quite make the cut for me, but was super close, was the Adolfo Pedernera 1935 Argos. Again, one of the top players of his generation, and the Argos cards are just drop dead gorgeous. So elite player, elite card, beautiful card. Maybe if I was going to put one set together or try to, the Argos set is like right at the top of the list. Then I had, I really struggled not to have Dr. Sorosi in the list, and this is, a late 1930s Candler cigarettes. Honestly, I feel like this card is likely, I mean, maybe the next one out of all the cards, right? So it just is so hard not to keep it. Obviously the Taddy Meredith took the day, but I did wonder about having a Bane Shield. But since I took the Wharton Bane Shield over the Geo Smith, I didn't feel good about putting a Meredith Shield in, and I just feel like the Taddy is more important. I could have picked any number of Nasasi cards. I know, Scott has the great early kind of rookie 1919, I think it's supposed to be. But here's the, you had these beautiful Eduardo Pai cards that are slightly oversized, but just gorgeous, of the 1924 team, and the Nasasi's there, and he's got the cracks and the Andes. And so, in the same way I struggled with him and not having him in, I also struggled with Andrade not having him in, and specifically his crack or the Andes with just the beautiful colors on these. And then, it's a card not a lot of people talk about, but I think that all of the Mosa cards are amazing, but this one even more than the other ones, because if you hold this card, it's like gold leaf. I mean, this is like, talk about like super refractor, pre-super refractor. You tilt this to the side and has this Byzantine gold leaf, which is, it just rings Ottoman Empire, even though this card was done in the 1930s. And I just love this card. So there were many more, and this took me a long time to decide on what cards were going to be in here. But in the end, when I sat and looked at it and wondered and checked pops and checked sales and just went to my heart of heart and said, which 7 would I keep as indicative of the best pre-war cards, I ended with these guys. So, one thing a lot of people don't know is that in Giza, well, it's the main 3 periods. There's actually 9 pyramids. You can see the big 3 in the middle, and then you have 3 on the side and 3 on the other one. So I thought about, when I struggled to actually adding a couple, and I think if I added them, I was probably going to add the Pedernera and the Sorosi. But even that's hard. And I just went back to, hey, the game here is the 7 pre-war wonders. So I went with these. I hope you liked it. I hope you liked this video. And if you did, I would really appreciate a like. I would really appreciate a subscribe. And if you could leave your comments on what you think of these cards, and if you would have done something different, I would love to hear from you. So thank you so much for watching this. Be on the lookout for the vintage 7 wonders, which basically starts after the war in the 1940s and goes up to the 1980s. And then after that, the third part, which would be the from 1980 on to present day. So again, thanks for watching. Subscribe, like the video, and thanks everybody.